There was guidance earlier on this year on writing to children for judges as well, which I thought was quite an interesting topic. I've included the link to the guidance in the slide. It's written in quite a friendly way, a bit like a leaflet, and I thought it was quite interesting that the guidance touches upon that actually it can be useful for very young children as part of life story work. I know where I've seen a letter to a child be done, it's been in 16.4 cases, or older children that are in foster care. So I think it was quite interesting to see that it's being recommended for younger children as well. And the President states in the guidance, my hope is that, like many things, once judges have used this toolkit and have written to children in a few cases, it will rapidly become the norm and no longer a task to be avoided. So my reflection on that was a bit like the contact changes that we're seeing with adoption and placement orders, is adopting to that modern world of actually the Family Young People's Board have said this would actually help us in having a letter. It would be nice to understand why the decision was made about me. So I thought this was quite useful to draw attention to. Just conscious of the time as well. So just on a quick point here, I've put guidance that's come out this year from CAFCAS, which is probably more relevant for private law, then guidance on covert recordings, which can crop up in a situation where a parent has recorded something that they think will help them because no one else will believe them that this has been happening at home. So it is an issue that crops up. There's some guidance there that may help if dealing with that situation. And guidance on neurodiversity in the family justice system. That guidance is, I think, really helpful. There's a list of questions towards the end of the document that is suggested that could be asked to a client if you're unsure of perhaps they do need a bit of extra help, but they haven't got a diagnosis, and obviously we can't diagnose, but it would be quite useful to find out some information that can help clients and make those adjustments for them in court. On transparency, just briefly here as well, the Practice Direction 12R came into force this year. What I thought was quite interesting is that this paragraph at 4.2 is that advocates need to be considering transparency at advocates' meetings and pre-hearing discussions. Of course, journalists may put the parties on notice that they intend to come to a hearing, but they may not do so. So the reporting in court is no longer a pilot, and it applies to all public law proceedings, save for those that are in the magistrates' court. So it is something that we all need to bear in mind. And that's paragraph 7.12 of Practice Direction R that deals with the kind of cases that shouldn't be, when a transparency order shouldn't be made. Just briefly here, I've included an update on the PLO relaunch. The President has noted that there was 37% of public law cases that were concluded within 26 weeks in the last quarter of 2024. I can't find any more statistics beyond that. And very briefly on future considerations, there's a Victims and Prisoners Act 2024. This is not in force yet, but this would in effect make that the Crown Court on sentencing has to make a prohibited steps order that a parent who has been convicted of murder or in some cases manslaughter and has PR, that should be curtailed. And the local authority would then have to apply to the court within 14 days for a review of the prohibited steps order. There isn't much guidance on how that will actually work yet in practice, but of course it's not in force, so it's probably early days for that. And similarly with the Victims and Courts Bill, that's only in its report stage in the House of Commons, so very early days. Briefly on doles, there is plans to legislate a new type of accommodation. There's some statistics there that was taken from the community care website with growing doles applications of a new way of managing that from the government. And lastly, there is a Law Commission project on kinship care at the moment. The consultation is not expected till next year, but it's an interesting point on the horizon of what recommendations may come of that. Will there be any suggestions of how a special guardianship order should be improved? Well, we have to wait and see. And that brings us to the end. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Patrick and Rebecca, for that. Notes will be sent out following today. It'll probably take a few days, up to a week, for that to happen. And can I now introduce Michael Woye from Children and Families Across Borders, who's going to talk to us about assessment of family members abroad. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I started to panic a bit there because then one noticed the light started going off as the last speaker started to wind down, and I was worried, like, I hope the microphone doesn't go off, I hope everything works. It's nice to be here to talk to you about assessments of family members abroad. I happen to come from Nigeria. I don't know if you can tell from my accent. That's where I was born, raised, trained, and qualified as a social worker. And I completed assessments for CFAB at the request of UK local authorities and UK courts for about 5 years while I was in Nigeria. So I bring a bit of unique perspective in having seen things from two sides of the coin. CFAB also works with partners in 130 plus countries. So it means that it's multiple views to getting assessments from overseas. And I hope that we'll get some learning in terms of what we go through, what our colleagues overseas go through in order to deliver assessments within the time frame that they give to you. By show of hand, by the way, when Patrick mentioned CFAB, I was slightly worried to say, I hope it's a good thing that he has to say about CFAB. And that's because we have so many partners, we get so many cases. You get a wonderful assessment from Pakistan. You said it was robust. I like the word that you used. You get good assessment from Nigeria, South Africa, Spain, Italy, to name a few. But you could also get a 2-page report from countries you wouldn't expect, like Germany. And in some countries, you don't know what to get back, like the USA, because you need to have a state license to practice. So because you are qualified to practice in New Jersey, it doesn't mean you can go to New York to practice. So it means that we don't know what we get back. We don't know who the case would go to. By show of hand, how many people have heard about CFAB prior to when Patrick mentioned? Yeah, so I think that caveat serves a good thing. For those who haven't heard about CFAB, okay, I was going to be cheeky to say maybe we do a bit of change in the room, and then the half who know about CFAB speak to the half that don't know about CFAB. But we'll not do that. We're 70 years old this year, and we have been protecting children and families across borders all of this while, doing different services, one of which is completing assessments abroad. And like I said, we have partners in 130 plus countries. Some of our partners are statutory services. Some of our partners happen to be non-governmental agencies like charities. CFAB is a charity as well. Some of our partners are lawyers, some of them social workers. And in some cases, there are countries where there's no social work structure existent there. And then you find we have a mix of maybe a psychologist and a lawyer completing the assessment or helping us with welfare visits and things like that. In the last 1 year, we have received 1,742 calls to our advice line, which is open from 9:30 a.m. every morning to 3 p.m. And we give a range of advice on anything international, social work related. If we can't assist, we will signpost you accordingly to who can assist or support you in the service. In that year, we received 288 cross-border child protection cases. This is where local authority has said, we're concerned for a child or children overseas. We have a location or we don't. We would like to notify services abroad of our concerns for them, and then we pass that on. But that's where it stops. We just pass it on, confirm that you've received it, and then we notify the local authority, because thresholds for child protection varies from country to country. Even in the UK, we do know that that varies from place to place, but even more significantly abroad. And we worked with 174 local authorities, UK local authorities, I should say, and using our partners overseas. So here are a list of the things that we do for the purposes of anyone who comes across an international case that needs our assistance. Like I said, we can do international child protection alerts. There are countries where, even without an address, we might be able to find the family. So there are countries who have a central data system, like South Africa, Latvia, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, the Slovak Republic, and a few others that have a central data system, and they can't find the family. There's one interesting case recently where the local authority had given us an address for the child, but when we provided it to our partner in, I think, Latvia, they were able to say, within the same week, to say, we've gone out, that's not the address, they actually are this address. So some countries are quite good like that. We can do record checks as well. If you have a family who's come from abroad, you want to find out if they're known to services in the country where they've come from, then we can find out if they are known to statutory services in the overseas country. Full assessments, which I'll be talking about for the most part. For record checks, it's mostly social service record checks, not police checks. For police checks, we would say go through ACRO. I hope that we know what ACRO is, but my slides here, I have, I think there's a resource section that mentions ACRO, but you can call our advice line, we can give you their contact information. They respond within a week, and there's a fee to get international police checks. Local assistance, if you have social workers traveling abroad to do assessments, we know some local authorities still do it. We're able to provide local assistance to help them to navigate the community and make it more culturally competent, the assessment. We do placement preparation sessions for prospective carers who are looking for a child to be placed in their care, to navigate things like contact, general issues around parenting. We also do post-placement support. This is when the child has been placed abroad, and we would like for somebody to go out there to ensure that the child is adjusting, is safe, and is adjusting to the new home, which can be daunting for some of them who have never been to the country prior. Our other services, I'm happy Rebecca mentioned life story work, is that we provide therapeutic life story work. CFAB is a small charity, so I wear several hats at CFAB. So as this slide progresses, you start to see a bit of, you can tell a bit of my personality in the slides, because I'm also a therapeutic life story worker, which means that you see lots of animation and things like that. We do this typically for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and young people who have come into the UK, knowing that they've had a very dangerous journey, they've had trauma, they've experienced trauma, and we try to do trauma-informed life story work using the Richard Rose model to help them to, because they say they are resettled, but some of them are only physically settled, but not psychologically or emotionally settled. So we do that piece of work. We also do 16.4 appointments. I happen to be a 16.4 guardian as well. Family reunification in the UK, we support refugee families who are in the UK and who have a minor overseas and are looking to have that minor come to live with them, typically their children, with the best interest assessments to support the application to the Home Office. And then we do virtual contact supervision as well. I'm going to run through because that's slightly outside of the remit of why I'm here today. Training. So if you're interested in any of these, we provide this at a fee, of course. We have a cultural family life library where we have collated information, history on certain countries like Nigeria, Pakistan, Romania, and Jamaica. That's the 4 that we have at the moment. This is to help social workers, local authorities understand a bit of cultural context to the families that they work with. And a couple of fact sheets on our website as well. So why are we here? Why is seeking assessments from overseas important? The reason is because we have found that 1 in 3 children in England and Wales, and 1 in 4 children, looking at the stats, in Scotland have a foreign-born parent. And of course, there are some areas where the statistics is higher or lower, which will determine the caseload that the social worker works with. But what this suggests to us is that you're very likely to work on a case where there is a parent or parents who have international connections. And sometimes it can even be transnational family connections. It can be multiple connections. I did a quick dig into our records to see, knowing that I'll be presenting to Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, to find out what countries have we been receiving inquiries and referrals for. And these came up. What you find in red are countries where, unfortunately, we do not have a partner there. But I will speak about how you can get assessments from these countries nonetheless, because there are other means to doing this. I'll be looking at my notes a lot. My goal here is to make sure I share as much as possible and don't leave anything out. So I'd rather do that than make it so fluid and miss key information. So there's a matter of competent jurisdiction to consider when you're dealing with, these are some guidance to take into account. There's to think about what country court has the power to make decision on the future of a child. And you have to look at, those courts have emergency jurisdiction or substantive jurisdiction. But I'm not going to speak to lawyers and judges about that. There's also cooperation through Hague, which has to go through for the Hague authority in the UK is known as ICACU. I'm sure some of us are familiar with ICACU, the International Child, I missed that now, International, units, International Child Abduction and Contact Unit. Are you from ICACU by any chance? I'm so sorry if you are. I know that. I don't know what happened to me. I messed that one up. So yeah, they are the authority, they are the central authority in the UK. What they will do when you make a request to them is that they will contact their counterparts in the overseas country, typically a country in Europe, but there are other contracting states outside of Europe as well. And then that's the contracting, the central authority in the other country, will then contact the relevant statutory agency to complete the piece of work. There's a ruling that discourages UK social workers traveling overseas to conduct assessments. We'll talk about how there's a danger to that and how, if you must do it, the best way to do it to get the best outcomes. There's also that piece that talks about notifying embassies if there's care proceedings issued to a foreign national. You have a duty to notify their respective embassies in London. So, getting assessment from overseas, who does it? Primarily 3 of these, CFAB, which I've gone on and on about, and then the central authority in the UK, not the UK, sorry, England and Wales, ICACU, and then the embassy. So the embassy is another way of getting assessments. Maybe I go a bit more into the embassy because I talked about CFAB and ICACU. So how the embassy can get you to get an assessment is some embassies, not all of them. The Nigerian embassy, unfortunately, don't respond to telephones and emails as at last week. We hope that changes. But some countries are really good that they have a they have a unit, really, that deals with this kind of cases. Poland is very good. Romania is very good. Some other countries will just provide you with a list of local authority contacts, but they might say we don't have any there's no system or no structure in this country, but we do have a list of independent social workers who might be able to get assessments for you. So CFAB, what do? We work with our ISS partners. We global, so we go outside of the remit of the Hague 1996 Convention. So even countries not signatory to Hague, like I said, we do have some partners in there. Some of them might just be independent social workers. We do charge a fee because we're a charity. We don't get any government funding. And we ensure that the assessments are completed by local practitioners, like by local experts, which makes the assessments culturally relevant. And then I'm trying to avoid the word culturally competent because I don't believe there's any such thing as being culturally competent. And carer assessed in their own language and community. We have cases where you have family who don't speak any English, and sometimes the language that they speak is quite rare, that you need somebody who's a professional in that locality to be able to fully interpret what they are saying, because sometimes what they say can be misinterpreted when you use somebody who has this similar language or not from there. I say that because we've had cases where we've had social workers from one part of the country that speaks the same language but a different dialect to assess a family who speaks a different dialect. And they can understand each other on certain levels, but there are certain key things that get missed out, and it's important to note. Timescales can vary depending on what country you're dealing with. We have countries like Bangladesh, for example, who have a monsoon season, which means that there's flooding and they can't go out. There are times when there is maybe an Islamic holiday which might affect assessment. There may be political instability. We can advise and say, this assessment, you're not getting it back, except it will be like a 14 weeks time scale, for example. I'll talk a bit about Article 33, consent to place, which some of us might be familiar with, so I wouldn't go too much into it. But what this is trying to say is that some countries require for their statutory authorities to complete an assessment on the family before a placement can take place. So you might need to, I'll talk about Article 33 shortly, but you might need to get them to do the assessment as well. So you can't do your assessment through an ISW, you can't have your social workers do the assessment virtually, but you need, before you can place that child or children in the home overseas, you need their statutory services to complete the assessment. This is the case for many Hague signatories, but also we're starting to see that even in non-signatory countries, for example, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, just this week, I was advised that the ISW can do the assessment, but we also, that's the statutory authority telling us now, we also had to do the assessment, otherwise you couldn't place the child here. So we do provide transparency around content. We'll tell you, this is the kind of assessment we receive. It's usually like I'd say Germany, it's usually a 2-page assessment. This is what you get, this is what it will contain. For this country, it would be X pages long. It would have social service record checks. It would have information on finances, on medical checks, on police checks, and so on. And these are the things that it wouldn't come with. So we will be transparent. And we also sometimes say you are better off going through ICACU for this assessment. The reason for that is because some of our partners happen to be central authorities as well. So for Latvia, Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, and a few countries, our partner in that country is also the central authority in that country. That's the same authority who will be completing the assessment were you to go through ICACU. So why pay us a fee for the assessment if you can get it through ICACU for nothing? But we would let you know when we advise. So other ways of completing assessments, you could establish direct contact. You could go on the website, online, and find the local authority responsible for where that family is domiciled, and then contact them to say, hey, I'm calling from Peterborough. I'd like to do an assessment on this family that lives in this area. Would you be able to assist? And if they speak English, they would. If you use the aid of an interpreter as well, they might be able to assist you. The other way to do it is we do know that UK social workers are traveling overseas to do assessments, even though we frown at this. But we understand how it is polarizing in terms of what is the standard assessment in the UK, and how that can be so different from what the standard assessments in the overseas country can be. And sometimes you feel like nobody's ever going to do it if you want something done well, do it yourself type of thing. But you have to think about other things like the legality of going overseas to practice. Like in the UK, you know that social work is a protected profession, so you are not allowed to come to the UK to complete assessments. Same applies to some countries like South Africa. You need a license to practice. USA, like I said, you need a state license, in fact, to practice. Some countries might be able to give you a temporary license, maybe a 2-week license to come in and do the assessment. But there are other issues to consider as well. Do you have the right visa? And you might need to contact the embassy to provide you with the advice. There's also prospective carers traveling to the UK, a similar example to what Patrick mentioned, like the case in Pakistan, where they wanted the father to come to the UK for assessments to be done because you want to see how they relate with the children and all that other practical things. But the issue with that is that for some countries like Pakistan, there may be some difficulty getting a visitor's visa for the purpose of this work to happen. Also, you miss out on other things like what the true state of the home environment is, what community resources are available. Should the child be placed in care with the father overseas, for example? Is there robust community resources or support service to support the placement? And there's remote access and complementary assessment. This is like a split assessment. This is a split assessment in a case where you do the assessment virtually, and then the overseas practitioner then goes to the home and then does a bit of the assessment to supplement. Or the other way around, where they go out, they do the assessments, they submit the reports, and then, I know there are time scales issues here, and then when they submit the reports, you can then do a remote virtual conference call to supplement the assessment that you've received. And then split assessments, that circle should say joint assessments. In this case, you're traveling overseas to do the assessments, but what you're doing is you're arriving in, I don't know, let's say Lagos, because I'm from Nigeria, and then the first thing that you've done, because you've told them prior, is to work with the ministry in Lagos State to say, I'm going to assess this family, and then the social worker from the UK and the social worker from the statutory services go and do the assessment. They get the information that they need to satisfy their standards, and then you also get the information that you need to satisfy the UK standards, and that can get married together to inform a robust assessment. Yeah, I think I mentioned all of this, things to consider when going abroad. What are the risks involved? Sometimes there are risks. I was presenting at a local authority, and then the team manager told me how one of the family members who she had assessed had followed her to her hotel room with an ammunition. So anything can happen, and sometimes it goes very smoothly. So before you start, you need to determine what is the nationality of the child. Often we see lots of assumptions being made because the child is born here. They assume that the child is British, or they assume that the child doesn't have any dual citizenship, and so on and so forth. So it's important to think about that. And then the other thing is to know, do they have a right to remain long-term? Should they be placed in the overseas country? What happens if placement breaks down? And that second part here, in terms of what type of assessments would you be seeking, dependent on the nationality of the child, you will see in this slide, again, my life story work thing coming out. So this is how it happens in the US. The first thing to think of is the child a US citizen? If the child is a US citizen, then that child qualifies for a kinship assessment or a parenting assessment. However, if the child is not a US citizen, then you have to ask, who am I assessing? Is it a birth parent or not? If it's a birth parent and they're a US citizen, then you can do a parenting assessment. If it's not a birth parent, or rather, if it's a birth parent and they're not a US citizen, you need to seek legal advice to find out how they can sponsor the child to be placed in their care. However, if it's not a birth parent and they're not a US citizen, then you have to also seek legal advice on how they can support the child to sponsor the child to come to the US. However, if they're a US citizen but the child is not, then you can't get a kinship assessment. What you are able to get is an inter-country adoption assessment, and we don't help. Adoption is outside of CFAB's remit. Interestingly, this is also the case with Canada. So whenever we send an inquiry or to Canada or a referral to Canada, the first thing they go to check is what is the nationality of the child, and that will determine if you do the assessment or not. So I've thought to put summary of some guidance on overseas assessment here. The idea is that we should be seeking assessments which are legally compliant and culturally relevant. And legal compliance in this case is not just for the UK, but also for the overseas country. And this other part from the DFE further emphasizes that social workers should be engaging with professional colleagues in other countries in order to ensure assessments are as holistic as possible, except if there are other reasons, like it might jeopardize if there's any risk of danger, for example. And then this is another interesting guidance I thought to put on here. As Recorder Samuels, sitting as a Deputy High Court Judge, pointed out in this case, it may be necessary to use multiple methods to achieve an assessment from overseas, and this is something that we advocate at CFAB. Even recently, just 2 days ago, we were at a meeting, a family group coordinators meeting, where we learned of family group conferencing. So this local authority told us that, and we talk a lot about getting culturally sensitive assessment, culturally inclusive assessment, culturally well thought out assessment. And this local authority were telling us, we got an assessment from by ourselves. It wasn't really great from the local authority. The statutory services overseas. And then we used CFAB, we used your ISW to complete the assessments. But we found out after our FGC that it wasn't culturally robust enough. There are certain things that were missing, which was a first for us because, we tell local authorities off, and they were telling us off to say, you didn't do your job well. I'll probably talk more about this case because what they found out, and these are some of the difficulties, but I feel like we can't come back to this. I need to give a bit of background to help you understand why it's important to look at other means when getting assessments. There are things to consider, consent to place. I think I already mentioned this. You need to check that you have consent to place the family overseas, and that's the article that points out to that. You have to get the Article 33, consent to place. Should I use the word onus, or the right to inform placement rests with the family, that the authority where the child will be placed, and not the authority requesting the assessment, not the UK local authority. So they are the ones who determine if an assessment is good enough for you to place the child. That's how they view it. So it's important that while we're meeting UK standards, that the standards of statutory services overseas are also considered and met. Otherwise, you might not recognize the court judgment to inform the placement, for the placement. So we say contact the central authority to find out if consent is required for the type of placement. This is also country-specific, so it's important to find out first. And then we say think about what post-placement support you might need for that authority, because that's important, obviously. And we, like I just said now, failure to obtain consent could lead to non-recognition of whatever order you get from the UK. The assumption is that whatever order you get from the UK is recognized by the other country. This is true for Hague 1993, signatories to the Hague 1993, Hague 1996. However, there are still steps that need to be taken before an order can be recognized. And also, in some cases, there are no orders. It's not replicatable in the overseas country. I don't know if that makes any sense. What I'm trying to say is, for example, SGO is known to only the UK and I've tapped on something and left my slides. It's only known to UK and Australia. Most countries don't know what an SGO is. So what you can see happening in most cases is that the overseas country are able to advise what order they have that is similar or close to what an SGO is, that replicates what other are getting from the UK, and that's how the other gets mirrored. So we say seek legal advice from the country. And the way to do this is you could contact CFAB. We have a legal advice service. You contact the International Family Law Group. You contact the International Academy of Family Lawyers. You could check the FCDO list. You can say FCDO list of lawyers in, I don't know, Bermuda. They have a list of English-speaking lawyers for English nationals. And what that, for UK nationals, and what that does is that you have a list of lawyers that you can contact to get legal advice. The other thing is that the respective embassies are able to provide you with a list of lawyers in their country as well. So, I've got 15 minutes to talk about what to consider when working with overseas authorities and professionals in terms of the actual assessments. And I think the first thing to note is that social work takes different forms in different countries. What social work means in the UK is significantly different in some countries. For some countries, social work is about community development. It's about buying maybe IGP camps, internally displaced camps, in supporting children and families there. And the context that they have does impact how they view assessments. So some countries have no informal social work, I've said, and some is about resource provision. And in some cases, there are no foster care system. There's no children's home. There is no foster carer in some of these countries. And then there's the issue of individual versus community. And you probably are familiar with Ubuntu, at least. That was quite popular during the Black Lives Matter movement. And what Ubuntu means is Bantu for I am because we are, which emphasizes the importance of community and responsibility of a community to raise a child. So it takes a village to raise a child. And this is similar to Ikibiri as well, which is in Burundi, and it means working together or coming together. And it means that communities rally around to support one another for finances, to build each other's roof, to harvest their farms, and also to raise their children. So keep in mind about the FGC. I'm going to come back to that, about how that is actually key. And then there's Wanao, which is also known as Wanao Gatanga. It's a Maori language, which means extended family. And in that case, all adults in the family are responsible for the care of the children. So there's no such thing as a placement breakdown in the sense that a child is falling through the cracks of care. Somebody has to care for the child. It is not, you're not doing anyone any favors. It is a responsibility for you to do. And then there's something called elders' wisdom as well, which means that in a community, the head is responsible for what really happens when there's a child protection issue. So when there's a child abuse or something, rather than go to statutory services, they go to the community head, and that's who resolves the matter. And if it's serious enough in their views, then they would invite the police, not even statutory services. And what you get is, if you ask for record checks, you have a social worker. If they don't understand what happens in that community, go to the statutory services to ask for checks. Is this family known to your services? And what they will get is 0. Whereas if they do some reference taking with the community head, they might find out that, oh, we have records of this and this and this and this and this. So that's something to take note of. I've talked about religious holidays being another barrier, natural disasters, bureaucracies. For some of our social workers, when they seek a record check abroad, they need to not just, like in the UK, when you want to do a record check, I just write an email or fill a referral form online of the local authority, and I get a response back within the week, maximum. But overseas, for a lot of countries, like, say, for Nigeria, Ghana, they need to attend the office in person, submit the request, and then get a telephone number if they're lucky to get one, and then keep chasing the statutory worker. Sometimes having to go back there to push and prompt to get the checks, which also results to delays. Sometimes they have to even travel long distances to get this done. So those are some of the issues that some of our partners face overseas. Language, I think I mentioned language as being a significant issue. Time difference, sometimes we're sending emails at a time when they haven't really opened up their service overseas. And the other thing is culture. Culture is really, really important. I don't know why I missed that out. But how the social worker coming into their home is viewed is important. It leads to how quickly the assessment is done, what cooperation they get from the prospective carers, and so on. It's important to also understand not just the verbal communication in terms of what they are telling you with their mouth, but what they're not saying, or what they're telling you with non-verbally. Symbols and things and signs that you need to take note of that would only be known to somebody who is from that country or from that locality. I used to give this example a lot. So one time I was doing an assessment in Nigeria, and then I traveled to see the parents, and I talked about physical chastisements. And they told me, oh no, we don't do that here. You probably, if you've heard me speak before, you've heard me give this example. And we don't beat children in this house. But I know the community well, and that's not to be put everyone in a box. But I was a bit more curious to be sure that wasn't happening. And so I said, okay, anyways, how about the school that the child will attend? And then we went to the school, and we asked the principal, how do you manage behavior in here? And I said, oh, this is what we do. We ask you to write something. We have a naughty corner. We ask you to go out to sweep the compound and so on and so forth. I'm like, no physical chastisement, no caning. I'm like, no, we don't do that here. But when I had walked in, behind this door was this big pot that had what is canes, like long canes. And I know what that is. It served no purpose but for whipping. And so I said, so what is that then? And he started to stammer. Because I understood the culture, basically, and I understood what that was. For somebody else, it might have been a piece of design, but for me, I knew what that is. And we've had cases where the assessor is asking the family, so how do you deal with the same question? And they say, oh, no, we don't do that here. But when it comes back the next day or the following day to say, really, how do you, on what occasion or how do you go about it? And then we hear things like, for the first time I heard that what a child does not hear with his ear, the child will hear with his buttocks, which means that the child gets spanked and that sometimes to get the message, they have to be spanked. That would have been missed if you had asked them the first time, second time, and they had given you the same answer. So sometimes what you get is disguised compliance. You have family members who tell you what you want to hear in order to get you out of their house. There are people who don't even have anyone ask them questions before around their parenting skills, and they find it insulting that you're asking them those questions. So you can have a chatty prospective carer telling you everything about how he met his wife when you're asking him about that. But when it comes to his previous relationship, he can't speak about it or can't speak about the finances. He's happy to show you the room where the child will live if they were to come to live with them, but consider it an anathema that you would ask to see their bedroom, And even that can determine how they respond to to the assessor going forward. But an assessor who understands the culture and knows what taboo topics are is able to better navigate all of this. Talked about acronym. This, for some social workers in the UK, say Scotland, for example, might not even understand what at least one of these things mean. So imagine when a social worker is sitting in, Italy, and sees Marak or CP. Not only does it not mean anything to them, but there's also the danger that it might mean something to them, but not what it should mean. And then they misinterpret what you said. So what we get most times when you send the referral to CFAB is that we then start to do almost like an interpreter's work. We start to give like footnotes on what this is and what it means for in the UK context, because we don't just say child protection, what this means in the UK context. So cultural practices, different? Yeah, I didn't miss it out, good. Social work systems are different. Role of the community is different. I've been asked to interview a father, to do an assessment of a father, and I was doing the assessment, and he was responsive, and, answering all of the questions. But luckily, I was able to speak to another colleague who was from that locality, and then he told me, oh, actually, in this village or area, you did mention that there's a maternal grandmother in the house. Sorry, a paternal grandmother in the house. From this culture, the paternal grandmother has the final say. So if you want this child to leave, this question around where the child will go to school, where would the child live, all of that question, the father has no say. She's like the matriarch. Whatever she says happens. So that person who was sitting down there looking at you, who you want to just ask a few questions, like how would you support the assessment, would be the primary carer. Dad would go out every morning for work and will only support the assessment. So sometimes it's important to understand what the roles are in the community. I've got 5 more minutes, so I'm going to do a quick run-through of pros and cons. Here I'm being transparent around what you can get when you do an assessment using local experts, and what the cons are in terms of, obviously, quality can vary as we've seen. Surprisingly, sometimes local authorities don't understand when we tell them that we're struggling to find a social worker in the USA to do an assessment. You think, what, the USA? And then it takes us weeks to find the social worker who's agreed to use our UK template. And then when they do the assessment, they're surprised how the social worker has provided one-line answers to each section, as opposed to doing a proper, robust, comprehensive assessment. And I've seen, we have received assessments from countries where we have only an independent social worker working with us, and the assessment is very robust, like in the case of Pakistan, where we work with social workers and a lawyer who both do the assessment together. So assessor does not have a UK understanding of UK procedures, laws, and regulations, and timescales are also prone to delays. So for the last 3 minutes, I think we can go through what our top tips from today is. I hope that I've managed to convey this. And I'm not just going to read. I'm just going to leave this here. And obviously, the slides will be made available to everyone. And I thought to leave 2 more minutes. Actually, this is close to the end of this is just the end of my slides. But yeah, question. I'd like to take the last 2 minutes to take any questions, burning questions that you might have. I know that after this is the fun stuff. We're going on our lunch break. But if you have any questions at the moment that would benefit, my response to that question would benefit everyone, I'm happy to take it for the last 2 minutes. No hands? Does that mean I did a good job or no? It's a good job. None. Okay. I guess I'll say thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. And that was really interesting and useful, and lots of practical information in those notes for us all to use for future reference. And I'm sure there are questions that people want to put to you, but probably over coffee in a minute rather than in front of everyone else, or about individual countries, etc. So that completes the first section of the training, and coffee is being served at the back. Thank you.